Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's virtual learning session. We've got a timely and technical update on something that we've all been dealing with for the last couple of months. The topic today is virtual learning, work from home options in times of crisis. You'll get one learning unit for attending today's session. You'll need to stay to the end to get that full credit. And we also have a Q&A function, and we ask you to use that either throughout the conversation today or at the end. We'll have enough time to go through as many questions as we can. That is at the bottom of your Zoom bar. And we'll get to as many of those as we have time for. For an industry that has had to work from home, we're very fortunate that we had the ability to do that. But it takes the right tools to do the job. So to hear more about some of the tools that you use more often than any others in the design phases is AP Persavic. AP is a technical specialist with a focus on the AEC industry, working primarily with Autodesk customer success and sales to assist architecture, engineering, and construction companies achieve their technology objectives and workflows. His background is in architecture, where he worked for 8+ years in the Washington, D.C. area. AP's project experience includes residential, commercial, healthcare, and U.S. Embassy design build projects worldwide. As part of Autodesk, AP has been focused on developing and articulating connected workflows associated with project design, construction, handover, and life cycle. Thank you, AP, for joining us today. I'm sure we'll benefit from your insight and get to see some really cool demonstrations of the tools that we have at our disposal.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike, and thanks for everybody attending. Megan, Mike, all of AIA Colorado for inviting me on to share some of the things that Autodesk has been up to in terms of the new working environment that we all find ourselves in, which in most cases is working from home. A little background on myself. I know Mike touched on it. Started my career in the DC area, but I first got my exposure to architecture really through a CAD software, and it actually was Autodesk software. So it's kind of fitting that I'm here in front of you guys today, as I've kind of shifted my career a little bit out of architecture, but I'm still very much included in those type of discussions. I work with architects, engineers, construction companies daily. And really, a lot of my focus lately has been, on exactly the subject matter today. It's actually, I think, the fourth time I'm talking about it today, in terms of how companies may potentially, move some of their workflows, to working from home, how to digitize parts of their company, digitize parts of their project, and really just keep everybody up and moving. I'm local here in Denver. I've been out here for the last 5 years, and really that's the start of my Autodesk career. And in that time, I have been focused on really a more holistic approach to the AEC industry. So looking at design, not only from an architectural perspective, but how we transfer information holistically from a project environment. So a lot of focus on design build, IPD type projects, a lot of owner type conversations where they're even thinking about how to leverage some of the information or design aspects downstream into facilities or even operations. So today, obviously, we're talking about the new working environment, working from home. But I hope, in the end of this conversation or overview, you guys might have a better understanding of some of the options that really are available to you guys in the short term to help work and help maintain productivity now, but also maybe think about some of the things that you may be able to position towards, as we look towards the future and a lot of the uncertainty that's going on with the new working environment. So really to start, guys, I just, again, want to start off by saying thank you. I know we're going to have a lot of architects and design professionals on the call. It's a subject matter that's near and dear to my heart. Like I said, coming from architecture myself, I can appreciate, the work that everyone on this call does, the day-to-day dedication that it takes. And, knowing that a lot of you guys work very closely with things like healthcare, civic projects, first responder type infrastructure, the situation that we're all going with globally right now really highlights a lot of those back-end importance. So again, thank you all for obviously attending today, but really just thank you guys for what you guys do on a day-to-day. And also, knowing that a lot of you guys use Autodesk software to carry out your day-to-day work, certainly appreciate you guys, appreciate your business on that front. So really, guys, I know this is probably going to be a little bit, cliche or predictable way to get things kicked off, but I really just wanted to start by kind of talking through some of the impacts that, again, I see on a day-to-day, and having a lot of conversations with architects, engineers, really any design and professionals. I'm sure a lot of these will be, very relevant or familiar to you guys, right? Obviously, we're all dealing with stressful times, but it really compounds things a little bit further when in your working environment, you're dealing with some impacts that are completely out of your control, right? It doesn't really matter in today's environment, how well you've designed in the past or how well you've performed on past projects. Everybody's dealing with, impacts to the working environment. And a lot of those are projects being put on hold, potentially being canceled, really just a general uncertainty of where things are going. And then when we talk about architecture specifically, right, when we talk about individual companies, you're now having to manage all of your personnel working from different locations. Obviously concerned about the bottom line, keeping the business intact and running efficiently, looking at project pipeline, staffing concerns moving forward, so those planning motions, and even assessing what partnerships make sense in the short term, maybe long term. And that's really a category where Autodesk has been focused on trying to position ourselves, not only looking at Autodesk as a software vendor, but really trying to be more of a consultative partner in a lot of our customers and a lot of our accounts. Really the name of the game today, obviously in the presentation, a big point of focus is a decentralization of the workforce, right? We're no longer necessarily rubbing elbows in the office together. So what impacts that have on our day-to-day in terms of being efficient, executing on our project, really keeping communication flows going within teams. A lot of times we're having to look at schedule flexibility in terms of the people we might be working with, right? A lot of us working from home, we have different situations where we might have to be watching our kids. We might have, dual responsibilities with our spouses, adapting to a new working environment where you may or may not have an office space to actually be productive, or even a workstation. So a lot of this is having to find this new normal in terms of how we schedule, how we work together in many facets. And then I touched on it, really the other major outlier that we're hearing a lot about, and I'm sure most of you are dealing with as well, is how are we effectively communicating across our company? I know we're on Zoom right now, and that's been a great tool for a lot of companies to jump on and do webcasts, kind of stay connected, even go through things like project overviews digitally. But all of this is really a new means of working, and a drastic leap from, say, just a few months ago in the way that we're all working now. So again, looking back, it's hard to believe that just a few months ago, right, we're talking about February, where a lot of our working environment was, air quotes, normal, right? It was kind of business as usual for most of us. A lot of us had projects that were mid-flight. We're still working in highly collaborative teams, most of the time on premises, so in the same working environment, maybe going through things like design meetings, looking at site execution, planning, different review type meetings, working through design development, detailing, maybe coordination with outside companies, consultants that we're working with on a day-to-day, and even, general production activities, right? These were all centralized typically in office environments, where people were, it was very easy to reach over a cubicle, reach across a table, and connect with a colleague to discuss, a design issue. Even things like, defining processes, looking at inter-team, workflows, looking at kickoff meetings for projects. These are highly interactive, typically in-person meetings or needs that now we're all basically reacting and having to scramble to figure out, what is that path forward? How do we effectively manage some of these processes again in this new working environment? And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to some of those scenarios in terms of being able to work through it. And I mean, in the span of literally a month, right, from February to March, everything basically changes, right? And this might be relevant to you guys. Obviously, we're on Zoom right now. This is a meeting that we had for a colleague that was actually switching roles. And generally speaking, this would be our Denver office meeting together for happy hour. And for this example, we're all just on a Zoom chat, trying to keep some level of connectivity, some level of camaraderie together as a group. So, all of this to say, we're all being exposed to a lot of different settings, right? A lot of different adjustments to, the office life, different resources at home, different access points into maybe technology that we didn't have before or need to have now, different workspaces, different work-life balances, super, super disruptive to all of our day-to-day. And I like taking a step back just to kind of focus on that for a second, because it can't be understated. A lot of the conversations I have with company leadership is really on that tone. It's how are we adjusting our culture? How are we adjusting our workforce, providing the right means of flexibility, empathy to our workers that are, dealing with a lot of uncertainty out there. And, it's suffice to say, Autodesk is no different, right? There's no company out there that hasn't been impacted in some capacity on this new world, right? So really all this, guys, I just want to start to set the stage, right, of how Autodesk is basically approaching this new working environment. And I thought it'd be, worthwhile just to start off with just some general resources that Autodesk has made available to all of our customers in this, new month-to-month setting that we've been dealing with since basically beginning of March. We do have some web pages that are directly geared around, specific resources in terms of accessing our software. All of these obviously are just showing up as bullet points for you guys. I'll make sure to work with the AIA team to have these distributed if anybody wants access to any of these links. But really they're a series of, best practices or how-to guides in terms of accessing your software, maybe setting up a deployment for a company that is trying to digitize very quickly. I know most of you guys have probably already moved through that motion already, but nonetheless, I think even in terms of review, some of those best practices, these would be very good resources to look at moving forward. And one that I do want to point out that really is going to feed kind of the rest of the talk track that I'm going to go through today is really this third bullet point. And that's going to be this extended access program for collaborative tools. And really, Autodesk has offered a lot of our cloud-based tools for free since the beginning of March. Right now, we're offering them for free up until the end of June. And there are talks of that getting extended out even further. So a lot of what we're going to go through today in terms of the technology that really enables this work from home setting or project management setting from any location, those two tools are going to be primarily in the BIM 360 portfolio, BIM 360 document management, and then BIM 360 design. Those, again, just to reiterate, are completely free out until the end of June. So if you guys do find yourself with immediate needs and looking for options to help manage some of the data sharing, communication aspects of your project, those are available for sign up through that extended access program. And I'll make sure to provide those links out to you guys after this. But really, when we're talking about these collaborative tools, just to level set, BIM 360 is an all-encompassing platform. It covers a lot of different aspects in terms of a project. Primarily today, I'm going to try to focus mainly on getting teams up and productive as quickly as possible. So focusing in on how you can manage maybe your design data, speaking in terms of AutoCAD files, how to share those, how to work on them collaboratively, and then additionally, the Revit side of the work, which we know a lot of customers have already shifted towards, and are really looking at a means of sharing files or modeling together in the same environment. It is worth noting, I know they're not necessarily as architecturally focused, but we do have in the BIM 360 design environment, when we speak to Revit, we do have those capabilities for, say, plant 3D or civil 3D. So to be able to incorporate more detailed design information, regardless of the format, trying to really take an approach that, if you're working with maybe process piping consultants, someone that's very focused on, plant design, you can integrate those into your design environment, and same goes for the civil aspects of a project environment as well. And I think what you guys will see as we move forward as well from Autodesk, that's going to be a continuing approach in terms of, how we're trying to provide infrastructure really for everybody on a project team to work together in a common environment as much as possible. So there's a high level of transparency, a high level of communication going on in the project setting. All right. Pushing forward, right? I'm gonna try to get out of PowerPoint as quickly as possible for you guys. It's not my preferred method of presenting, but we are just gonna start off talking briefly about the BIM 360 platform. For those of you that are unfamiliar, like I said, BIM 360 is meant to be an all-encompassing project environment. So depending on what phase you're trying to work through, it's really meant to facilitate early processes in design, all the way through, building life cycle into operations, ongoing projects. We have a lot of customers that use BIM 360 to execute all the way through construction, and then into operations, use this platform as basically a digital twin environment of their facility. So any ongoing projects basically operate through the platform, which really serves as a common data environment, again, for the entire project. A lot of content, guys. I could spend over an hour on any one of these little columns. Really, for the sake of today, just to reiterate it, right, we're going to be focused in on the design portion, which again is going to be mostly Revit focused, a bit on AutoCAD, and then some of the document management service that is available in the BIM 360 platform as well. Okay. And just to outline, right, for some of the outside capabilities, we are going to focus, like I said, on the top two that are highlighted, but this really is meant to serve as a platform where you can facilitate, say, constructability reviews, run clash analysis on, the different trade or discipline models, track RFIs, track submittals, shifting gears into construction activity, right? Really working on, the construction management side of a project. So how are we tracking things in punch list? How are we assigning issues across different consultants or different contractors that are coming into the project, and making sure that we're having the proper communication aspects and tracking that should go on in a project environment. So just generally speaking, a lot of capability there. We're going to focus mainly in these top two, which mainly serve on the front end of a design project. Okay. Mike, I do see a couple things popping up in the chat. Is there any questions that are worthwhile to address right now, or should I keep pushing?
It's up to you. They are on point from where you're at right now, but they can also wait till the end.
Sure. Yeah, let's go ahead and address them.
Okay, so the first one is on relevant to BIM 360. Is there any plans to migrate off of BIM 360 in the future?
So I would kind of ask a follow up to that. I'm not sure exactly how the question is framed. I'm assuming you're asking about the future of the platform, the future of the Autodesk strategy. I'll speak to it in that lens. Is that about accurate, Mike?
Yeah, there's two. So one would be, where do you see the platform going? And have any shortcomings or goals for how you want it to change been revealed in this new environment? The particular thing to be addressed in the present is if your office isn't on BIM 360 and you sync some of your data and you're using, normally if you're in an office, you've got access to the dedicated server, you're not on the cloud, it's not so tied to your bandwidth speeds, right? So,
Sure.
And these are big files, right? So
Yep.
is there a workaround for that?
Sure. Yeah. Let me take these in chunks. I'll first address the question in terms of the future of the platform. One thing that should be of note, right? For those of you unfamiliar with Autodesk strategy, Autodesk has made a lot of acquisitions in the last year and a half in the construction space. So it's no secret that Autodesk is trying to take a more, aggressive approach to facilitate the entire project lifecycle, right? So some of those acquisitions are Building Connected, which mainly focuses around the bidding process, PlanGrid, which is really focused on field activities, markup, communication. There's definitely some redundancy there with BIM 360, but Autodesk strategy is moving forward, basically a big integration of a lot of those technologies. So what I will say, right, there are gaps in what BIM 360 addresses or doesn't address, but what our strategy has been to acquire other companies. They're working on folding in different technologies into the platform as we speak. And then anything that we're not directly trying to address from an Autodesk perspective, we're looking at addressing via open APIs, which BIM 360 is built off of. So there may be point tools that are the best tool for the job for specific things. And that's something that integrations help with and basically, allow you to pull information in and out of the system as needed. So, unfortunately, the big picture stuff, guys, that's well above my pay grade. I'd love to be able to speak to that a little bit further, but I'm going to punt, the big roadmap stuff on that front. But Mike, to the question in terms of, potential workarounds or workflows in and out of design, we'll definitely be addressing that as we move forward. But one thing I do want to keep in mind for, everybody on the call, when we talk about Revit specifically, right, that's usually the format where we start getting into those extremely large file formats. One thing that's important to understand, when you're using BIM 360 design, the Revit model is essentially just shifting in terms of its access point location, right? So like you guys already mentioned, you typically be on your server, you just connect to it directly. That model would now live in BIM 360, and you basically be opening from that cloud platform. To address the concerns in terms of bandwidth, Mike, what's important to understand is although that central model lives in that cloud environment, there's actually a downloaded cache structure of that model that lives on your end user machine. Now, it's not like a .rbt or openable file that lives on your end machine. It's just a cache structure that represents that entire model, right? So all the data within it. So when you open and sync to that model, it's basically a push and pull of Delta cache files that are really only the differences between your local copy that you're making changes with and that cloud database where your extended team might be making changes to. All of that happens through an accelerator. And I got to be honest, I've used this design service in coffee shops on Wi-Fi, really kind of unstable, I'd say, connection types. And honestly, because it all happens through a accelerator and a cache push and pull, it's not a huge push of information every time. And the speeds are more or less comparable to any typical office environment. So good to address right off the bat, but there's certain best practices that could always be worked into that equation as well to see improvements on performance there. So.
Okay. Thanks, AP. We'll keep an eye out for follow-up questions and let you get back to it.
Absolutely. I'm sure there will be. And yeah, some of that we'll certainly address a little bit further on, guys. So good questions off the jump. So to start, guys, really I'm going to go into BIM 360 document management. You might hear me refer to it as docs. Really, this is the foundation, one of the foundational pieces to BIM 360. And it's generally the main access point into any cloud services from an Autodesk perspective. So I'm just going to pop open, to start, just some slides that generally outline some of the capabilities within the document management service. What's important to understand, first of all, guys, it is completely a cloud environment. So any web browser, any mobile device, iOS, Android, you can basically connect into your data structure, anything that's been uploaded or populated inside of BIM 360. And what you guys will see on screen, it's a general folder breakdown structure that hosts your files, right? Nothing super fancy, right off the bat. But it is important to understand that it is built to not only facilitate kind of the work in progress motions that design teams need to go through to progress designs, but it is meant to distribute documentation to outside parties as needed. So everything within the system is permission based, and you can manage that at a folder level. So if there's certain places where you don't want everybody, maybe consultants, maybe a client you're working with, you only want them to see certain pieces of information, you can manage that in terms of the permissions that those users would have in the system. Really primarily when we talk about document distribution, it's really generally 3 file formats that are most common. That's going to be Revit, it's going to be AutoCAD, or PDFs. And really, when we talk about managing project data, a lot of times it's really just managing kind of the milestone distribution of your project, right? So, maybe 50% DDs, 100% IFC packages, any addendums, bulletins. This provides a very easy access point to basically distribute or publish out, milestones of your project in many cases. And it's important to understand, right? When I host, say, a Revit model, AutoCAD, or PDFs in certain locations, I can choose to have an extraction happen on those models. So basically any sheets that I have in Revit basically get extracted out and hyperlinked together. So it makes the document, navigation a lot more effective. I can jump to a section, I can jump to an elevation as needed. And really PDFs are gonna happen the same way, right? If I upload a multi-page PDF, it'll extract out, if I have 100 sheets in it, it'll extract those sheets out and link everything together. Much like, I'm sure most of you are familiar with a Bluebeam type motion where it links a lot of the documents together. What's important to understand, I can, like I mentioned, I can manage the sets associated with this data. So if I have a model that is my, addendum number 2 that I want to distribute out, basically I just select what sheets I want in Revit, I upload it into this environment, and then I can choose to have the set affiliation come through as well. So makes that document management process a lot easier to manage there. I already touched on it, but permissions are a big piece of this, right? So if I want to restrict access to different roles, to different companies that I might be working with, I can certainly customize that out as needed. And really a backbone here, guys, that we'll talk about a little bit further on in the demonstration. I do have the capability to add markups, track issues, really have a higher level of communication across my, maybe internal team, even outside consultants or contractors that I might be working with. If I need to be able to articulate intent, clarify issues, that's a fundamental piece of what BIM 360 is meant to facilitate in a project setting. And we'll go further in detail in a little bit here. Another aspect too, just to understand, when I upload documentation and it's tracking versions or addendums, I do have the ability to actually visualize changes that are going on in my project. So on a sheet to sheet level, I could see the changes, colorized on, say, a PDF drawing or an AutoCAD file. Same thing when we talk about things like Revit. I actually can get a version comparison going where it will colorize objects in my model and tell me, okay, what's been added, what's been modified, what's been removed version over version in my project. So effectively trying to facilitate that change management process, but also inform the team, whether it's internal just for architectural scope of what changes have been made, what impacts that might affect. But even when we think about this in terms of multi-companies coming together in one environment, understanding what the other disciplines are manipulating, what they might have changed in terms of scope, how that might affect what I need to change in terms of my architectural design, trying to bring some of those changes to the forefront to the team, whether it's internal or external. And we'll go in a little bit greater detail of that when we talk about the design component as well. Lastly, or I shouldn't say lastly, one of the other aspects here, guys, is really the ability to actually customize out review processes in the system. So basically, I have the ability to set, however many steps of review processes I need, include different personas to those steps, different companies, set timelines in terms of how long they should have to review something, set approval statuses or names on the back end. Really, it's a workflow engine that you can customize in the project setting to allow it to fit your needs. And really, there's no limit to the number of approval processes that you want to set up. So, if you're going through a document review before a milestone, you can set that up as a specific stepped review process. If you're going through maybe a submittal review and you want to work it through, these multiple steps, you could set that up as a separate workflow with a separate number of steps. So a lot of customization there, a lot of capability in terms of, the way you set that up and manage it within your individual project settings. And really, lastly, guys, when we talk about document management, I did want to touch on, its ability to basically host AutoCAD files from a working environment standpoint. If I host or post AutoCAD files inside of BIM 360, I do have the ability to actually lock those files, and I do have the ability to actually open them directly from BIM 360 in AutoCAD and work on them and save my changes back to BIM 360. And again, based on those changes, the versions tracked, the user information in terms of who made the last modification is tracked. And then, like I mentioned, the ability to lock down files so you don't run into situations where, multiple people are trying to operate or work on that same file at the same time. So those are some general bullet points around the document management service. There is a lot more capability baked within it. But for the sake of time, guys, I'm gonna press forward, and then I will leave some time here at the end where we can have some general discussion, and I'll actually jump into the tool and demonstrate a few of these activities live for you as well. So switching gears just a touch, document management, like I said, is the foundational piece to BIM 360. There's an additional component built on top of it that is more Revit specific. And that's at least the lens that I'm going to speak to it on this call. I did mention that there is a plant 3D, a civil 3D aspect to it as well. I'm going to focus mainly on Revit for this next portion. So we talk about design collaboration, just to kind of talk through its baseline, functionality. Really foundationally, what we're talking about is taking your Revit model off of your local server and hosting it inside of BIM 360, right? So when your end users go to open that file, they're opening it through BIM 360 in lieu of going to, say, their server location. Like I mentioned, the process from an end user for Revit is generally the same to open that file. You're just going to go open, there's going to be a BIM 360 tab inside of Revit. You're going to open that model, and essentially anybody that has access to that module inside of your BIM 360 project will have the ability to open and edit that Revit model. So it is essentially the same workflow where you can have multiple people in one file at the same time, synchronizing to that central model, working as if you guys are all in the same work environment, same office location. And for me, when I think about work from home capabilities, and when I talked about our extended access program in terms of trialing out some of these capabilities, I'll be quite frank with you guys. This is the most traction we've seen in terms of companies reacting to this working from home environment and basically moving their projects into this BIM 360 design workflow. I've worked for a year inside of our deployment team inside of Autodesk. So I spent a lot of my time, pre-pandemic, basically helping teams migrate into this type of working environment And now, as companies are trying to react to their workforce working from home, we've seen a lot of companies move towards this type of working environment. And most of the time, guys, just to keep in mind, it's just for internal work. So as an architectural group, just keeping my team productive. Maybe I don't have the IT infrastructure to scale people working from home and accessing things, on our servers. This is a very simple way of providing access to those users just to be able to remain productive, continuing to work on their Revit environment, continuing to design together. It's kind of the lowest hanging fruit in terms of its service. I did mention it, but it's worth reiterating, right? This design component is built on top of that BIM 360 Docs environment. So your project data, your Revit model lives inside of your Docs project. This design component is really just the additional service that allows you to work and work share your model via Revit. There is an additional piece to this that is an individual module within BIM 360. It's called Design Collaboration Module. And really this comes into play for projects that are meant to facilitate multiple different companies or multiple different disciplines in one working environment. So this is a more structured approach to the way that you would share information across teams, maybe across companies, to understand, what people are working on, and again, speaking to that change management process within a project. Okay. And again, guys, I know we're 20 minutes out of the top of the call. I'm going to jump into demonstration in just a second here, and hopefully that'll help contextualize some of this. So again, we talk about design collaboration. This is a specific module built inside of your Docs project that facilitates this cloud work sharing environment. Again, we look at this being cross-discipline. So on the top, you'll see that there's a series of swim lanes that represent maybe different teams that are coming together in a project environment. And you'll see different pinpoints on the model in this case. Those represent different issues that are meant to be collaborative across maybe an internal team, maybe across a different company, right? So if I'm dealing with maybe a shaft location that I need to shift based on, a structural design that needs to change, I basically track that communication method using these issues. It allows me to basically assign it to different companies, different users that are affiliated with my project, and keep things organized as I move through this project environment, right? Making sure that things are being communicated effectively and closed out effectively. I mentioned it early on, but this is a good example of it. We talk about a more structured approach to sharing information across teams. I know I've been guilty of it in the past, right? Like I've had to shift maybe ceiling heights, maybe a circulation path, different design options that I'm working out from an architectural perspective. In the past, we always used to articulate our changes via revision clouds, maybe share or post an update of our model, once every 2 weeks, once every week maybe. But it was always really hard to understand what changes we were articulating to the team. Again, those revision clouds get kind of cumbersome to manage. And what's further, it was even harder to figure out what the other teams actually changed version over version in their design effort. Sometimes the narratives were not very clear. It took a lot of onus in terms of the end users to be able to dissect the model and understand what changed. This change visualization aspect allows you to compare version over version of that model. Say for architecture, what you're seeing on screen is basically a colorization of those changes. So I can very quickly understand, okay, we changed these ceilings or these specific objects. And what's further, the other teams that I'm coordinating with can see those changes as well and react appropriately to those outputs. Really the last thing, guys, I can include these shares of information to my document distribution sets. So again, things like milestones become a little bit easier to manage because they are directly plugged in terms of this system. Okay. Mike, let's do a brief pause. Let's check. I know there's a couple other questions that popped up here. I am going to shift into showing the tool a little bit more live, but if there's any that makes sense to address right now, let's go ahead and do that while I'm just switching screens here.
Sure. One of the questions I think was about the extended access program, which, as you said, and I'll reiterate, that was an adaptation that you made for the client base early on in the process, which I know people appreciate. But for folks that might take advantage of any of those extended access tools, and then when they expire or they get back to the office and decide, it might not be worth the cost to pay the subscription going forward, how do they migrate the data back? Is it lost, or is there a way to keep that in progress?
No, great question. That's a conversation we're having quite a bit in terms of companies that I've worked with a few directly that have included a couple hundred people, quite literally, in this trial program. And there is, be quite frank, right? I work for Autodesk. There is a cost to the software, right? It's not always free, but in the short term, it does provide a good means to work for free in the near term. And then in terms of migrating on the back end, really it is as easy as picking a date and time where you're going to choose to say, I'm going to pull my project off of BIM 360. Really all that looks like, Mike, is downloading the Revit file and then re-hosting it on your maybe local server where you guys would always have worked in the past, right? So it is some file management, it is some data management that you do have to go through, but it's a very easy process to do that, and it is quite literally as easy as downloading the most current iteration of that model and hosting it appropriately. So.
Okay, great.
Yep, absolutely.
Ready to transition to the next piece.
All right, perfect. Mike, can you just give me a spot check? Can you see my web browser now? It's no longer on PowerPoint.
Yes, I do. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, guys, I just want to walk through a couple things in terms of the capabilities here that BIM 360 does provide. Right now I'm in document management, and what you guys see on screen is basically my architectural folder that is basically the location where my living, breathing architectural Revit model lives, right? So from an end user perspective in Revit, as long as I have access to this specific project and this specific location, I can open that model directly in Revit and perform my day-to-day work as needed, right? So in Revit, what that looks like, I've already opened this model, obviously, but in terms of working and carrying on my work, if I've made changes to this model and I go to synchronize it, it's the exact same process that all the end Revit users know in terms of synchronizing. I'm just hitting synchronize. The location of that file is just different than my local server, right? It's hosted inside of my BIM 360 project. But what's important to understand here is I do have the same capability in terms of having as many Revit users as needed in this model at the same time, working together. You still get the same ownership permissions in terms of objects. So there's no way that you're modeling the same thing at the same time. You still get those pop-ups that ask you to place requests for ownership of specific elements if those situations do occur. So the end user perspective is exactly the same. And what's further, when you're maybe trying to include outside consultants in this process, it's very easy to link in their information into the same model environment. So obviously right now, guys, I'm in the architectural model, but you'll also see the mechanical systems on the rooftop. You'll see the structural components in terms of its piers, its pile caps at the bottom. And really, if I go to manage links of this model, you guys will see that, the mechanical model, the plumbing model, structural model are all linked in this common working environment. And all of those models live in BIM 360 in that same project as well. So really, why I like pointing that out is it's very, very easy to essentially manage, the process of sharing files, of getting people aligned in terms of where information should live using this BIM 360 environment. And just for context, right, my job in architecture, I was kind of a quasi BIM manager, project manager, project architect, if you will. I spent literally every Friday afternoon strictly managing our files from the 8 different consultants that we were working on for our big projects. And that was a lot of data management. It was a lot of uploading to FTP sites. There's a lot of downloading off of FTP sites. And using a tool like BIM 360, if we're centralizing all that information in a common workspace, that file management aspects of a project just fall away. Essentially, I can structure the way or the workflows in my project to make sure that I'm getting updates at appropriate time from these consultants, and essentially facilitating not only the data, but that communication process that should happen between those updates. Okay. And just to shift back, another benefit here that is worth stating: a lot of companies have their Revit end users that are obviously important to remain productive. But there's also a need for, say, principals, project executives, maybe even project managers that never have any Autodesk software installed, but still need to interact with it from a review standpoint. BIM 360 does provide a very good access point into this information, right? So I can click on this model, and it's basically going to show me a viewable file in terms of the last milestone update that I pushed out of Revit. So I have a model viewer that's readily available to me. I basically just need general access capabilities into this web browser environment, and I'm able to actually interact with this model, right? I can orbit around. I can actually jump into, say, first person mode and start navigating this model environment, right from day one. I don't need to be a Revit guru. I don't need to have Revit installed at any capacity. I literally can just jump into this model and start navigating it using this web browser. And again, right, I'm just using my keyboard to kind of directional arrows to walk around, look around this environment. Let's say I'm looking at overhead conditions and I want to hide my ceiling conditions. I can do that, right? I can look at the ductwork interacting with the structure, interacting with the fire protection, really that fully aggregated environment to my project setting. And what's further, right, when we talk about review, I'm not going to get into all the details of, all the picks and clicks to that workflow, but I do have a general markup tool set readily available to me right from this viewer, right? So I can start adding markups. I can assign these to other users that I might be collaborating with. I can assign issues, as needed, whether I'm in the 2D documentation or the 3D views of this model. And this really allows me to start using this platform as a means to communicate my project. In lieu of breaking off into email with attachment, I can basically centralize the communication around the most current, communicable information, or the most current iteration of my document set or my 3D model. And then, if I am managing things like RFIs or submittals, I can even do the same thing with, say, RFIs if I'm trying to communicate across a project setting. Again, the strategy here is trying to centralize some of these communication aspects that happen within a project. So did want to go through that briefly. Mike, I know we're kind of coming up on the 10-minute mark. I did want to leave some time for kind of discussion. Really the last thing I'm going to show here, guys, and then I'll open it up. When we talk about this design collaboration module a little bit more specifically, here's basically my project timeline that represents potentially the different companies coming together in a project. What's important to understand with this timeline, right? It basically will go back through the entire history of my project as long as I've been using the service. And each of these nodes basically represent different times in my project cadence that teams have shared updates to their models. So if I need to go in and dissect a date and time or a release package, that might have impacts for my scope of work, I ultimately can click in on that node and very quickly just go in and say either explore, which will take me to that model viewer, or click on this show changes aspect, which again is going to visualize my model for me, right? It's going to give me a deep understanding of, okay, between my last share of information for architecture, which goes back in this case, maybe a couple weeks, this is the information or the changes that happened on my model information. And I can actually click on these things, right? So I can understand that my compound ceiling is shifted by 6 inches, up in this case, between, March and say November of last year, right? So understanding this change analysis and even being able to toggle back and forth between those changes is a big aspect of the strategy Autodesk is taking to really integrate, not only internal teams to understand the design process better, but really the overall project environment, cross-discipline, cross-company. So Mike, I didn't want to turn this into a big sales pitch, but obviously we shifted into the software pretty quickly there. Really just wanted to expose the group in terms of, some of the capabilities that Autodesk has been working on in this environment, all with a backdrop that, from day one, you can sign up for this trial, you can host your information and get up and moving very quickly with a lot of these back-end capabilities that, you don't need at day one, but you might potentially grow into when you look at other projects or other ways of working. Right?
Well, you got to speak from what you know, and this is the product you know.
That's right.
So we appreciate that. Building on that last point a little bit, has the onboarding process changed at all for customers that take these new platforms on board?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I worked with our adoption team for about a year inside of Autodesk, and in the past, when we talked BIM 360, it's really been strictly more of a construction-focused tool stack that has gotten that adoption attention, and that's shifted in the last year inside of Autodesk. So we do now have a dedicated team that works directly with strictly design customers that basically will work with you to get you fully onboarded, set up your project environment, define the workflows as needed, make sure that, on an individual project basis, there's alignment in terms of expectations and the way things should work, that, really hasn't been there in the past. I'd say even 9 months ago was not even there. So say yes, there are a lot more resources, whether it's Autodesk Direct, even some of our partner reseller companies that offer those services. And from Autodesk Direct, with your subscription, right, there is a cost to these tools typically outside of this trial program. Those adoption services are included in your subscription cost. So they're essentially, free if you make a purchase, if you will. So not exactly free, but available.
Yeah. And obviously those are all, a lot of the resellers would either come to the location to help with onboarding or do training, in person. Obviously that's shifted too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, for me, I spent a lot of my time, say last year, actually going onto job sites and meeting with, in the trailer, meeting with, full teams, owner, architect, engineers, contractors, fully in one space. Obviously with the new working environment that's shifted, but being that Autodesk focus has been in the cloud for, I'd say easily the last 2 years, maybe even 3 years, has been a strong focus for Autodesk. Not to toot our own horn, but we are a little bit ahead of the game in terms of the way that we can interact and help project teams scale even remotely. So
if you haven't been a customer before and you want to take advantage of this extended access program, what does somebody do?
Yeah, so I'll follow up, and actually here while I got you guys, I can pull open basically the main page for this extended access program. And if I scroll down here, guys, these are the eligible products that are in the access program. So you guys will see this BIM 360 design that's more focused on the Revit component, and also this document management environment. So I'll drop this into the chat, Mike, and I'll follow up with you guys in terms of getting this page out in an email as well. But really, it is as easy as going in and clicking in on the appropriate service here that you want access to. So
okay.
I do have a couple other resources that I can provide out. This is basically just an article that I wrote up that is more focused on Revit specifically, but this is literally a step-by-step in terms of setting up and walking through, the Revit deployment.
Mhm.
There's a YouTube video embedded in there. Unfortunately, you guys will have to listen to me talk more, so apologies for that. But it is literally me walking through setting up a dummy account for myself and signing up for the trial. So there's some best practices in that latest link I sent there.
I'm curious what products have been most popular since COVID started?
So mainly, Mike, I'd say the most onboarding that we've done has been on this design component, and really that speaks to just trying to maintain productivity, right? If you guys still have projects that are ongoing, right, some of the deadlines don't change, and there is still the need to be able to work and produce effectively. And honestly, a lot of companies, like all of us in some capacity, were kind of blindsided and had to react to this crisis. So honestly, I'm trying not to be Autodesk biased, right? I work for the company, but even if I didn't work for Autodesk, honest assessment, this is the easiest way to get your Revit deployment up and running as quickly as possible. So that's where we've seen the most traction in the short term, is just trying to get the data hosted, getting people productive again, and then working with companies to figure out their next step in terms of what this looks like at the end of the crisis, right?
Is there any distinction between that, what you're saying is most popular, between the folks who are using the extended access program or just the total customer base?
I'd say the extended access program has mainly been in design as well. Obviously, we do have other tools that are available in that program, but I think most, in terms of just looking at maybe like straight seat counts in the industry, right? A lot of those are AutoCAD, a lot of those are Revit. So that's a big percentage of our customer base that's really just trying to figure out the most effective way to work. So that's been a big chunk of the effort lately.
Yeah.
So.
I imagine there's probably still some firms and individual practitioners that hadn't fully dove into the BIM world yet.
Yep,
and
that's right. Yep.
Might be the time for them to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm biased, right? I work for Autodesk again. I'll reiterate that one more time. But even with companies that have worked with for the last year or so very closely, a lot of them have seen project slowdowns. Maybe projects have gone on hold, but honestly, a lot of that time that now is not maybe project focus is starting to get redirected in terms of, okay, when we do get back and operational, what's the best way for us to work? Especially considering that a lot of these work from home considerations might not change, right? We might be dealing with this for, hopefully a short period of time, but realistically, none of us know that, right? So trying to figure out the best means forward and, effective way to work, but also looking to the future, what's going to be the strategy for a company moving forward? What's going to be the best means of working for our culture, for our workforce, for everything there.
Are you seeing more people use this on some of the back end? I know you referenced consultants integrating in this and doing their work separately, but I'm also wondering, the firms weren't the only ones who were staying from home. A lot of plan reviewers and job site inspectors were too. Are you seeing what used to be more of a paper output become migrated over to this digital interface?
Absolutely. And I mean, the case by cases always vary, right? In terms of requirements, in terms of the way people want to interact. But what I've seen most commonly, right, is, say, for architecture firms, they might have already been using this service on one or two projects, but they know of its capabilities. And now all of a sudden they're having to have all these other outside activities that you're talking to, Mike, all these other collaborators. And it's kind of an easy jump to say, oh, well, we already got our project information inside of BIM 360. It really is as easy as just inviting these folks into the appropriate location, providing them access in terms of the right way that they're supposed to interact with whatever type of review process or, whatever project need, just defining it, maybe doing a brief training on it, and, seeing that the time to deploy in terms of those outside collaborators is pretty quick.
And in some cases, it's even faster. I know a lot of building departments are leaving a box outside the front door and saying, if you have a bundled plan set, leave it here and it's going to sit for a day before anybody touches it.
That's right.
Versus something that comes across the computer screen and that reviewer can start looking at it right away.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, I do think in some capacity there will always be needs for hard copies in some capacity, right? I don't think that's something we're going to shift away from quickly. I think we're already starting to see a push away from that in many cases, but you know, a tool like this does accelerate those type of conversations. And I mean, even when I just look at like a day-to-day operations, we used to use so much paper in our architectural office for redlining, and like the redline process in BIM 360, it's not perfect, right? It's not the same one-to-one that we all know and love with onion skin and sketching, but you know, you do have the ability to digitize things, flag an issue. You can always take a snapshot of your markups or onion skin sketches and include that to at least keep the conversation moving, articulate the intent, and you know, maintain productivity. So a lot of creative ways of using it and adapting, really.
Well, please keep us informed if there is an extension to that extended access program. It's been a great service to the profession and would be popular to keep it around for a while too.
Absolutely.
And we're grateful for this insight from Autodesk and for you being available to us today. For those who could not participate on the call or the webinar, we will have it recorded. So we hope that the access to this information will be even broader than what we've shared today with the attendance. And we really appreciate the people who have joined us today. I want to just underscore something you said earlier about, you know, this is a time for empathy for workers. And one way that you provide empathy to the people that work for you is give them the tools they need to do the job without any more stress than we're already dealing with right now. So this is one of the ways we can do that. So we appreciate knowing about it and sharing it with a broader audience. Thanks, AP. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Mike, and appreciate everybody's attendance, everybody's time.
Tomorrow, if you have some time at the same time, at noon, we'll be having a presentation from a number of architects who have won awards for their restaurant designs. We've done a joint collaboration effort with the Colorado Restaurant Association, looking at the new public health guidelines for restaurant openings across the state. And they'll be sharing some of the tools they've come up with and ways that you can adapt the restaurant scene from a design perspective. So we hope you'll join us for that and stay tuned for future sessions on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Have a great rest of the week. And thanks again to AP.
Thanks again, Mike. Have a good one, everyone.